The sun hung low over the towering spires of Sunspire Academy, casting long shadows across the vast training grounds. The air crackled with tension as cadets gathered information, their expressions a mix of determination and fear. Today was no ordinary drill. Today was the trial by fire, a test that separated warriors from the weak, a challenge so brutal that even seasoned recruits whispered about it with dread. Nathan Carter stood among them, his jaw clenched, his mind focused. He had trained for months, pushed his body beyond limits, but nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead. The instructors had given little information, only that the trial would simulate the chaos of real war. What they didn't say, however, was that this time something would go terribly wrong. A sharp mechanical voice echoed across the arena, signaling the start. Cadets, prepare for deployment. A sudden rush of wind roared as the massive simulation barriers flickered to life, turning the empty training field into a war-ravaged city. Buildings smoldered, sirens wailed in the distance, and the heat of simulated fire licked at the edges of the ruins. The transition was seamless, disturbingly real. Nathan adjusted his visor, scanning the battlefield. His squad stood beside him: Lena, a sharp-eyed sniper, Davian, a heavy weapons specialist, and Ryo, the fastest scout in the academy. They had trained together, fought together in mock battles, but now, for the first time, the stakes felt different. The objective was simple: rescue the hostages deep within enemy territory and survive. But Nathan had a bad feeling about this mission, a nagging instinct that something was wrong. The squad moved swiftly, weaving through crumbling buildings as the first wave of enemy combatants emerged, mechanized drones, fast and relentless. Their weapons fired glowing projectiles, meant to stun rather than kill, but Nathan knew that if they failed here, their future in Sunspire Academy was over. "Cover me," he ordered, moving forward with practiced precision. Lena took position on a half-destroyed rooftop, her rifle locking onto targets with deadly accuracy. Davian's heavy gun roared, sending a hailstorm of energy rounds that tore through the advancing machines. Ryo darted ahead, scouting their path, but even as they fought, Nathan couldn't shake the eerie sensation creeping up his spine. Something about this trial felt off. Then, it happened. A sudden, violent distortion in the simulation. The sky flickered, the buildings trembled, and for a brief moment, everything felt too real: the heat, the smell of burning metal, the distant cries of civilians. Nathan barely had time to react before his visor glitched, and suddenly a bolt of plasma sizzled past his head: real plasma, not a simulation. Time slowed as he dove for cover, his mind racing. The simulation's safeguards were gone. This wasn't part of the test. The bullets were real. "Lena, report!" Nathan barked, pressing against the cracked concrete wall. His comm crackled with static before her voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Something's wrong, Carter. The safeties are down. These aren't training rounds." Panic rippled through the squad, but Nathan forced himself to think. If the simulation had been sabotaged, that meant someone wanted them dead. But why? And who? Before he could process it, a new enemy appeared. Not drones, not AI-controlled units, real soldiers, moving with lethal precision. Their armor bore no insignia, their visors glowed an unnatural red. They weren't part of the academy. Nathan knew in that moment they weren't just cadets in a trial anymore. They were being hunted. The squad scrambled into defensive positions as the unknown assailants opened fire with live ammunition. Sparks erupted, walls crumbled, and suddenly, the trial had become a war zone. Nathan's heart pounded as he realized the horrifying truth: this was no accident. Someone inside Sunspire Academy had set them up. But who would do this? And more importantly, why? His grip tightened around his rifle as he exchanged a glance with his squad. Fear flickered in their eyes, but beneath it, a fire burned. They weren't just students anymore. If this was a real battle, then they would fight like real soldiers. Nathan took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the chaos. "No one is coming to save us," he said. "We get out of this ourselves. We survive." And with that, the trial by fire truly began. Nathan's breath came fast as he pressed his back against the cracked concrete wall, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning metal filling his lungs as distant gunfire echoed through the ruined city. This was supposed to be a controlled simulation, a test designed to push cadets to their limits, but now it was something else. The trial by fire had become real, and the bullets tearing through the air were no longer harmless training rounds. Somewhere along the line, the safeguards had failed or been deliberately shut down. Nathan's squad had trained for every possible scenario, but nothing could have prepared them for a fight where the enemy wasn't just a program. They were real soldiers, armed and lethal, hunting them like prey. From his position, Nathan caught a glimpse of Lena, crouched behind a pile of rubble, her sniper rifle pressed to her shoulder. Her usual sharp focus had turned into something darker, real fear, real determination. A few meters away, Davian braced his heavy weapon against the remains of a collapsed transport vehicle. His muscles tensed as he scanned for targets. Ryo, the fastest among them, had already disappeared into the maze of ruins, scouting ahead for a safe path. But Nathan knew the truth: there was no safe path. They were surrounded. The enemy was precise, coordinated, and relentless. Whoever they were, they moved with military discipline, their attacks strategic rather than reckless. Nathan's gut told him these weren't rogue AI drones gone haywire. These were mercenaries, real killers brought here for a purpose. But why target cadets? What was the end game? He didn't have time to figure it out. A sudden burst of gunfire forced him to duck as sparks exploded from the concrete near his head. The enemy was closing in. They had to move now. Nathan signaled to Lena, pointing toward the remains of a half-destroyed building to their left. If they could reach higher ground, they might have a chance to spot an escape route. She nodded, adjusting her rifle, while Davian laid down cover fire, his weapon roaring as a wall of bullets forced their attackers to take cover. "Go!" Nathan shouted, and in a flash, they sprinted across the open street, their boots pounding against the debris-strewn ground. The heat from the fires burning around them made the air shimmer, distorting their vision as they pushed forward. Ryo reappeared at the edge of the next alley, waving them through. "I found a way out," he called, but his voice carried an urgency that made Nathan's stomach tighten. "It's not good." They didn't have a choice. Nathan led the charge into the alley, his squad following close behind. The moment they entered, the ground beneath them shook as an explosion erupted nearby, sending a shockwave through the narrow passage. Dust and rubble rained down, forcing them to cover their heads. Nathan coughed, his ears ringing, but before he could recover, he felt a presence, a shadow moving in the smoke. Instinct took over. He spun, his rifle raised just as a figure lunged from the dust, a blade glinting in their hand. Time slowed as he fired. The shot was clean, precise, and the attacker collapsed without a sound. The body hit the ground, and for the first time, Nathan got a good look at them, not a fellow cadet, not a drone, but a fully armored soldier, their insignia scratched away. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone had turned this test into a death trap. Before he could process it, another burst of gunfire ripped through the alley. Nathan and his squad dived for cover behind the wreckage of a transport truck. "This is insane," Davian muttered, reloading his weapon with shaking hands. This was supposed to be a simulation. Nathan didn't respond. He was already scanning their surroundings, his mind working through the only option they had left: fight their way out. Lena took a sharp breath. "If we stay here, we die," she said, voicing what they were all thinking. Nathan nodded, his mind sharpening like steel under pressure. "We keep moving. Stick together. We don't let them pin us down." He turned to Ryo. "You're the fastest. Find us an exit. We'll cover you." Without hesitation, Ryo disappeared into the ruins, his form vanishing like a ghost. The rest of them braced for another attack. Minutes stretched into eternity as the enemy closed in. Shadows flickered in the smoke, red visors glowing through the dust. Then, the silent shattered gunfire erupted from both sides, the battle igniting once again. Nathan fired, his shots clean and controlled, but the enemy kept coming. Every movement felt like the razor's edge between life and death. The air was thick with tension, with desperation, but deep in his chest, something else burned resolve. Then, a voice crackled in his earpiece. "Ryo, I found a way out," he said, breathless. "But you're not gonna like it." Nathan exhaled sharply. Wasn't over yet, but if there was one thing humanity had always proven, it was that they didn't break. They endured, and they would survive. Nathan gritted his teeth as he crouched behind the remains of a collapsed wall, his heart pounding against his ribs. The firefight had barely stopped, the air still thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. His squad had managed to escape the ambush, but the truth was clear now: this wasn't just a training accident. Someone had sabotaged the trial, turned their test into a real battlefield, and unleashed killers upon them. But why? Who would go this far to eliminate mere cadets? As he wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind raced through possibilities. But one thing was certain: this was no ordinary enemy. Whoever they were, they knew the Academy's security systems well enough to override them, which meant this betrayal wasn't coming from the outside. It was from within. Ryo reappeared from the shadows, breathing hard, his face covered in dust. "I scouted ahead," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a clearing near the old transit station. Looks like an extraction point, but—" His hesitation made Nathan's stomach twist. "But what?" he pressed. Ryo shook his head. "There are people there. Armed. Not drones, not cadets. Real soldiers." Nathan exchanged a glance with Lena and Davian, both of them grim-faced. So this was it. Proof that someone had set them up. A rogue faction? Corrupt officers? The Academy's enemies? The questions swirled, but answers would have to wait. Survival came first. Nathan exhaled sharply, gripping his weapon tighter. "We don't have a choice. If that's the only way out, we take it." He turned to Lena. "Can you get eyes on them?" She nodded, climbing a broken support beam until she had a vantage point. Peering through her scope, she whispered, 5 men. Heavily armed. Their gear isn't standard issue. A pause, then her breath hitched. "Wait, one of them? I recognize him." Nathan tensed. "Who?" Lena's hands shook slightly as she adjusted the scope. "Lieutenant Cross." The name sent a chill down Nathan's spine. Lieutenant Cross, one of their academy instructors. Shock coursed through the squad, but Nathan forced himself to focus. If Cross was involved, this wasn't just a test gone wrong. This was a setup. The academy had always been strict, pushing cadets to their limits, but betraying their own. Why? Was this some kind of secret trial to weed out the weak, or was Cross working for someone outside the academy? Before Nathan could think further, Lena spoke again, her voice urgent. "They're talking to someone. I can't see their face, but—" Her voice dropped lower. "They're wearing an academy uniform." Nathan's blood ran cold. Someone from the academy was directly working with Cross. The betrayal wasn't just from one rogue officer, it went deeper. Maybe it was a secret faction, maybe even the academy leadership itself. But none of that mattered if they didn't make it out alive. His mind worked fast. If Cross was here, that meant he wasn't just watching, he was leading. Maybe they could use that against him. Nathan's squad had one advantage: they were ghosts right now. Cross and his mercenaries thought they were still hunting frightened cadets, but Nathan was done running. It was time to turn the hunt around. "New plan," Nathan said, his voice firm. "We don't sneak past them, we take them down." Davian gave a grim smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Ryo frowned. "That's suicide. They're better armed." Nathan nodded. "But we're better trained. They don't expect us to fight back. That's our edge." He looked at Lena. "Pick your shots carefully. We take out the ones on the perimeter first, then move in before they realize what's happening." She steadied her rifle. "Ready when you are." The seconds stretched as they moved into position, every breath calculated, every movement precise. The first shot rang out, silent and deadly. One mercenary dropped. The others barely had time to react before Nathan and his squad struck like lightning. Davian's heavy fire pinned them down, forcing them into cover, while Ryo darted through the chaos, delivering quick, lethal strikes. Nathan himself moved with purpose, his rifle finding targets with ruthless efficiency. The ambushers had become the ambushed. But then a voice cut through the gunfire. "Enough." "Impressive," Cross said, stepping forward. His men were down, but he didn't look worried. He looked amused. That set off every alarm in Nathan's mind. "You think this is over, cadet?" Cross chuckled, shaking his head. "You're just getting started." Before Nathan could react, Nathan's head pounded as he regained consciousness, his ears still ringing from the explosion. The world around him was blurred, the scent of smoke and burnt metal filling his lungs. As his vision cleared, he realized he was alone. The ruins of the battlefield stretched before him, fires burning in the distance, casting long shadows across the broken ground. His squad was missing. His weapon was gone. And the only sound he could hear was the distant crackle of flames and the occasional echo of gunfire. He had to move. Pushing himself up, he staggered forward, his body aching from the impact of the blast. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what had happened. Lieutenant Cross. The ambush. The betrayal. The last thing he remembered was Cross's voice mocking him before the explosion sent him into darkness. Now, Nathan was trapped in the aftermath, cut off from his team, with no idea who had survived or if anyone had survived at all. But one thing was clear, Cross wasn't finished with him yet. The air was thick with heat as Nathan moved carefully through the wreckage, his instincts sharp despite the pain in his body. Every step felt heavy, but he forced himself to keep going. He needed to find his squad, or at least a weapon, anything to fight back. His fingers brushed against a shard of metal, still warm from the blast, and he clenched his fists. "Fire forges steel." The words echoed in his mind, a lesson drilled into every cadet at the academy. Hardship, pain, struggle, these were not weaknesses. They were what made a soldier stronger. Nathan gritted his teeth. If Cross thought he had broken him, he was wrong. A distant voice snapped him back to the present. He ducked behind a collapsed wall, peering through the cracks. Two mercenaries, armed and alert, their movements precise. They weren't searching randomly, they were looking for something. Looking for him. Nathan's pulse quickened. He didn't have a weapon, but that didn't mean he was defenseless. He had his training. He had his mind. And most importantly, he had nothing to lose. He watched as one of the mercenaries turned his back, scanning the ruins with his rifle. That was all Nathan needed. Moving like a shadow, he crept forward, his footsteps silent. In one swift motion, he grabbed a piece of broken steel pipe and struck. The mercenary crumpled without a sound. Before the second one could react, Nathan lunged, locking his arm around the man's throat, cutting off his air. The struggle was short, violent, and over in seconds. As the mercenary went still, Nathan pulled the rifle from his hands, his grip tightening around the familiar weight of the weapon. Armed again, he moved forward, his senses heightened. He could hear voices now, Cross's men were nearby. But there was something else. A signal. A distress beacon. His squad was alive. Hope surged through him as he followed the sound, weaving through the ruins until he reached a clearing. His heart clenched at the sight before him. Davian, Lena, and Ryo captured, kneeling, their hands bound. And standing in front of them, smiling like a predator, was Lieutenant Cross. Nathan ducked behind cover, his mind racing. Cross had them. If Nathan attacked now, he'd be outnumbered. But waiting meant risking their lives. He gripped his weapon, steadying his breathing. "Think, Nathan. Use the fire. Let it forge you." Then, an idea formed, a risky, dangerous idea. He scanned the area, spotting the remains of an old fuel tank near the mercenaries. If he could create a distraction just for a few seconds, it might be enough. The battlefield was silent now, except for the faint crackling of dying flames and the distant howl of the wind. Nathan stood among the ruins, his body aching, his breath heavy. The night had been long, filled with fire, betrayal, and blood. But now, the darkness was ending. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and soft gold. The sun was rising, but there was no peace in its light, only the cold reality of survival. Nathan glanced at his squad: Lena, Ryo, and Davian. They were bruised, battered, and exhausted, but they were alive. And after everything, that was enough. Their enemy, Lieutenant Cross, had escaped, vanishing into the shadows with his secrets. But his plans had failed. He had tried to break them, to turn them into nothing more than pawns in his twisted game. Instead, they had fought back. They had survived his fire, his deception, and his traps. Now, they had to decide what came next. Nathan knew they couldn't return to the academy as if nothing had happened. Cross had allies, powerful ones, and if they went back without proof of his betrayal, they would be treated as nothing more than fugitives. Lena wiped the blood from her forehead and sighed. "We need to move. We can't stay here." Ryo nodded, glancing at the wreckage around them. "They'll send more. If Cross really had people inside the academy, they'll come looking for us." Davian tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let them come," he muttered. "We'll take them down, one by one." Nathan understood his anger, but they needed a plan. Fighting blind would get them killed. He turned to Lena. "Did you recover any data from their comms?" She nodded and pulled out a small device, its screen flickering weakly. "Some. Not much, but enough to prove Cross was working with someone inside the academy." Nathan exhaled. It was a start, but proof alone wasn't enough. They needed to expose Cross, to bring his betrayal into the light. And that meant they needed to return not as lost cadets, but as soldiers ready to end this war before it even began. Nathan looked at his squad, his friends, the only family he had left. "We go back," he said firmly, "but not as prey. This time, we hunt." A determined silence followed, then nods of agreement. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were warriors. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the battlefield. Nathan felt something shift inside him. The night had tested them, had pushed them to their limits. But now, the sun was rising. And with it, so were they. Stronger. Fiercer. Unbreakable. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.